Welcome to Unit 8 of the TESOL course at Southern Utah University. In this video, we'll be focusing on listening teaching tips. We'll talk about how to improve listening ability. We'll talk about some challenges that listeners face, and then we'll offer some teaching ideas and assessment ideas. The idea of improving listening comes primarily from a researcher in linguistics called Stephen Krashen. And Stephen Krashen proposed the idea of comprehensible input. This is represented another way as sort of I plus 1. And I represents what the learner can already do or understand, and the plus 1 means something a little bit harder. And so to improve listening, we need to understand where the listener currently is and then push them to work just a little bit harder over time. And in that way, they'll improve. But we need to make sure that what they are listening to is really at their level, because if they're not, they're going to be lost. If we can't understand 90% of the words that we're listening to, then we're not going to understand the message that we're hearing. At the same time as we're trying to improve our listening skill, we need to recognize that there's two kinds of ways that we can focus on a listening text. We can focus on the meaning and understanding what the meaning's telling us, or we could focus on the language and trying to understand and learn new language. But our brain is not very good at doing both of those things at the same time. So if we do want to listen to something for language, we might want to then go back later and listen for meaning. But if we try attending to language and meaning at the same time, we usually will miss part of the message. Let's talk about some of the main challenges that learners face when they're listening. One of them is register. We've talked about register before, but register is influenced by changes in pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. If we're having to listen to something that's in a register that's different from what we're typically used to, then chances are we're going to have difficulty understanding. The level of interactivity can affect our listening ability. So if there's lots of chances for us to participate in the conversation, then we're more likely to stay focused and interested. If it's more passive, where we're just sitting back and listening to a lecture, it may be harder for some learners to stay focused and motivated. Oral language, we need to recognize, is very different than written language. We can talk about things like oral language has lots more filler, comments like or you know. There's more assimilations where sounds get squished together, especially in English. We have reductions where sounds disappear. And because of that, the correspondence between the way the word is spelled and the way it's pronounced can be difficult for some listeners. We also have to deal with informal language sometimes in spoken language. It's more common than in written language, so things like slang or idioms are more common, and learners may not be prepared for those kinds of expressions. We've talked about polysemy before. Polysemy means the different meanings of words. That's the same word might have multiple meanings, and that can be a challenge when listening because we may not know which meaning is being used. Oral language tends to have more redundancies where people repeat themselves, or digressions where people go off on a tangent and talk about something that's not related to the main topic. So learners have to recognize how to recognize redundancy and digressions, when to ignore those things, and when to focus on the main idea. Listening can also have distractions, like background noise. It would almost be like trying to read something that is written on paper that had images underneath it. And so it would be hard to recognize the language because there's these distracting sounds in the background. Also, the rate of delivery, or the speed that the speaker shares the message, can influence how easy or difficult the message is. So all of these challenges can be adjusted by the teacher as they decide which kinds of texts to have learners practice with. Let's talk about some other teaching ideas. First, if we're going to do a listening activity, we need to prepare students for this. We might do some top-down strategies, get them activating their background knowledge. What do they know about the topic we're going to listen about? What do they think will be the organization or structure of the listening? Make some predictions about words or phrases that we might see. These kinds of things can prepare listeners for a challenging listening text. During the text, it's always helpful if we can use visual aids. If there are images or charts or graphs or other things, or even just seeing the speaker and using that body language, those extra linguistic knowledge could help make that listening more comprehensible. After listening, we should stop and reflect with students. What went well? What was confusing? What words did you understand? Which words didn't you understand? And helping them be more metacognitive as they evaluate themselves and their ability. There's a variety of different activity types you could do with listeners. Let's talk about a few. One of them is listen and repeat. This is basically for drills, right? I say a word, students repeat it back after me. And really the main focus here is on pronunciation and recognizing words. We could go a little bit deeper by having listening and answer, right? They're maybe asked a question and they have to give an answer. This might focus just on discrete kind of skills or ideas, but it's another way to test and evaluate listening ability. Then there's a listen and do. This is more task focused. Give instructions or give something else that learners have to do something in response to what they're hearing. And then this is related to the idea of listen and interact, which is really about moving into communication and discussion, right? We're listening, we're speaking, we're going back and forth, and we're trading those roles. But all these different activity types are great ways to practice listening, and we may need to decide which activity type is appropriate for the level of learners and also for their goals and then their ability in relation to the text that they're working with. We can also use these different activities for assessment or classroom practice. One of them is dictation. So dictation means listening to someone speak and then writing it down. And usually when most TESOL professionals would recommend when you do dictation, say it 3 times. Say it first in a natural pace. Say it the second time slowly, pausing between thought units or phrases. And then say it a 3rd time back at a natural, normal speech rate. And this gives the learner time to verify that what they wrote is correct. You could also do a fill-in-the-gap assessment, where learners have to listen to something and then fill in the words that are missing on their page. You could do information transfer. So for example, maybe someone's presented with a form or a chart, and they have to listen to fill in the missing information in that chart and present it in a new way, in a new manner. This is related also to developing note-taking skills, which is especially helpful for academic English learners, is helping them understand how to take good notes, what good notes look like, but also helping them listen to lectures and identify the components of a lecture and how that works. Some other good listening tips to think about is helping students take more control or self-regulation for their learning, helping them decide what kinds of materials they want to listen to. It can also help them self-evaluate. How well are they understanding these materials? Do they need to try something harder or something easier? It's always good advice to encourage learners to listen a lot outside of class, but also to sometimes use the same listening text more than once. That repeated listening can help build fluency. And fluency is an important part of developing that listening skill. So in this video, we talked about improving our listening ability, some of the challenges that learners face, and we talked also about some teaching and assessment ideas.